Formally welcome anyone who's just joined us. This is the start of our webinar, 10 easy ways to improve customer satisfaction. And I think it's a topic that's going to be a lot of interest to people. I think some of the studies we've seen, the Institute of Customer Service has said that customer satisfaction after a number of years of growing has sort of leveled out or even started to tail off a bit. So I think it's certainly a topic that is of great interest to our audience. Well, I'd like to introduce to you our speakers and panelists today. Delighted to be joined today by Maurice Pentle from the Customer Experience Foundation. I think, Maurice, you were so convinced that customer experience needed to get better in the organisation. You were a founder of the Customer Experience Foundation.
Coming up to 10 years ago, I heard the term from some guy in America, and it expressed what we needed much more. And I just thought that's a great way to describe the future. And 10 years on, you know, everybody else agrees with me, which I'm relieved with, because that's not always the case. I often head off in the wrong direction completely, but yes.
Excellent. So Maurice is going to be sharing his wisdom with us, a lot of material that Maurice is going to be going through. Also delighted to be joined by Jonathan Kershaw. Jonathan is the Director of Product Management for New Voice Media. And Jonathan, you've had a long and illustrious career in the customer service environment.
Absolutely, it's been yes, thoroughly been enjoyable and educational, and I think that's what's made customer satisfaction so interesting, that I have the ability to try and create that platform for people to actually say what they want and then make a difference, and drawing on that experience. So it's a thoroughly good place to be at the moment.
Excellent. Also delighted to be joined by Chris Haggis, who's the Senior Vice President of Customer Success for New Voice Media. Chris, your first webinar with us, and you've been out and about helping people improve their customer success and their customer satisfaction. So I think it's going to be quite a fascinating webinar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got some good points on here, and some of the stuff we'll touch on later is the importance of emotion within the customer experience now, which is a big thing for us with some of the technology we're providing now. And I've been doing contact center projects for 20 years, and for me, coming to a provider that does cloud stuff has kind of been a breath of fresh air from taking the headache of rolling that technology out into making it achieving real business benefit easily.
Excellent. Well, if you're not already, if you want to watch a replay of today, and we have got a lot of material, callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. So if you're not already logged in, the chat room is the place to log into. It is here, callcenterhelper.com/chat, fairly easy to do. It is a separate window, so you might want the webinar screen on one side of your screen, the chat room on the other. There is a big advantage of being into the chat room, that you can download the slides from there. And Maurice in particular has got a huge amount of detail on his slides that I think would be very valuable if you were to be able to access those, or you might want to refer to those later. So log into the chat room. And we're added advantage being in the chat room is we have a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. And you can also pose questions in the chat room. If you could use hashtag tip for a tip, hashtag question for a question. We probably send off more champagne than any other organisation I know. We very little of it ever stays about.
The champagne, isn't it?
Well, we can't keep we can keep the champagne in the office. We can't keep the chocolates. And we're asking a question in the chat room: is customer satisfaction or improving or getting worse in your company? And that's quite interesting to see, and some quite interesting results. A number of people are saying that customer satisfaction is plateauing. Raj has said the trend is improving month on month, although agents in the contact center need to be continuously educated. Puya said customer satisfaction is improving in certain areas within the business, and it's something we can track quite closely. Cass says our customers seem to score our advisors very highly, but score the company much lower, and I guess that's potentially showing maybe there's a trend of broken processes or perhaps some root cause analysis that needs to happen in your organization. And we're going to be sharing with you some tips about how you can improve that. But what I'd like to start off now is I'd like to ask a question, and we'd like to ask about how you are currently measuring customer satisfaction in your contact center. So it's a really pick all that apply. If there's any answers you don't see, if you'd like to put them in the chat room. So are you measuring the percentage of satisfied customers? Are you measuring the number of customer complaints? Are you doing first contact resolution, net promoter score, or customer effort score? So how are you measuring customer satisfaction? Jonathan, have you got a guess of which one you think will come up top?
I'm thinking net promoter score will come up top because people feel they need to do that because there's an exec push behind it, but I'm rather hoping it would be customer effort score.
Okay, well, let's have a look at what the results show, and I'll share them on the screen here. And indeed, you have predicted the right answer there. 55% using net promoter score. 45% first contact resolution. Surprising, bearing in mind in a lot of the resurgence in the old CSAT measure, only 40% are measuring the percentage of satisfied customers. I would have expected that to have been a bit higher. 40% looking at the number of complaints handled, and 21% customer effort score. We've got a few other people doing some other things. Craig has said we do a combination of the above plus NCP 48. I don't know if, Maurice, have you heard of NCP 48?
No, that's a new one to me.
Okay, well,
I don't remember.
I'd be most interested to say that. Chloe says we've got no measurements at present, so in a dark area. So hopefully, Chloe, you might be picking up some interesting advice from this. So yeah, that's quite fascinating. So yeah, Craig, if you can put in what NCP 48 is, would be interesting to see. We probably know, but not under that an acronym. So it's probably a good time to now pass the baton across to Maurice Pendle from the Customer Experience Foundation. Maurice, if you'd like to share with us some of the ideas, some of the easy ways that people can improve customer satisfaction, just pass the baton across to you there, if you'd just like to share your screen.
And hopefully everybody can now see my screen.
We're seeing it now, yes.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you very much, Jonty, and thank you, everybody. And as Jonty said, what I've done is I've put together a group of slides that are designed to be read after I finish my slot. I've got about 20 minutes to talk about 4 key areas. And what I'm going to do is try and outline a series of tips, of practical things that you can do relating to those 4 key areas. So creating a more social organization is probably one of the key strategies that people should be looking at for 2018. I'm going to explain why, and how to get some incremental steps in transformation. I'm going to talk about managing customer emotions before I finish, and also I'm going to talk a bit about customer effort. So why should we become more social as organizations? The bottom line is that almost every acknowledged independent research organization who publishes on the subject strongly outlines a case that customer experience driven as a social network, crowdsourcing, crowd engagement, the Apple business model and things like the giffgaff business model are profoundly more efficient financially and in terms of driving innovation. So becoming a social organization is something that's clearly, strongly identified as a great step forward. And as I travel around the world, more and more organizations are talking about doing that. So everything that I'm going to say is towards that goal of becoming a more socially oriented organization. becoming more of a social network. So I'm going to talk about reviewing your transformation program. I'm going to give you some simple ideas about habits and stuff you can do. Most importantly, I'm going to try and explain to you simply a way of measuring emotions and connecting it to your SWOT and your P&L. And then I'm going to talk briefly about reducing your effort. So one of the things that you should be focused on is how can we improve our transformation process? And if you think about what I spoke about before, well, the answer's got to be better social engagement, because our customers and our frontline colleagues inevitably know more about the customer relationship than we do. They inevitably are able to co-create and to come up with more ideas. And of course, I mentioned before the Apple model. There is a view that because of the level of engagement of Apple customers, however many staff Apple say they've got, every customer actually represents a small element of an additional FTE, because they're promoting the product, they're developing the brand, they're out there solving fellow customers' problems. They're part of the model. And that same model also applies to giffgaff, where effectively customers are a part of an FTE. So asking yourself some questions around how you might move things forward, how you might get more customers and staff involved in transformation, how widespread, how well did you do last year? I put up a series of questions here, and of course you'll develop your own, but the idea is really simple. How can we become more socially engaged? Because that's probably going to help drive transformation more quickly. So that's the first one. And then the second thing I just want to talk about in terms of transformation is about how you get some momentum. And I'm going to give you an example of how you get some momentum, but the reality is that getting momentum is the most difficult thing. Getting momentum in transformation is about getting people to move beyond what they're doing today into a new thing, and that's not really in our nature. So what you really want to do is to find some small-scale things that you can use in order to design the transformation experience better. And here's one of my suggested pieces. So many of you will be aware of the theory of nudge behavior. It's where basically by doing some behavioral analysis, you can find ways to nudge people's behavior. And I'm going to talk about a really simple idea that you can use. And it's just as an example, but it gives you an idea. So one of the most common habits we have is smiling and saying thank you. And there's no reason why you couldn't make your colleagues more aware of smiling and saying thank you and starting a conversation about it. Now, why that's important is because the first thing you need to do if you want to get people more engaged in your process is to ensure that actually they're engaged in communication. So here are a few that you can try. You can get people to more consciously say thank you and more consciously smile at colleagues and customers and see what the outcome is, perhaps at the end of the day, perhaps at the end of the week, but it's a communication starter. You can have 5-minute holiday meetings and discussions around what people are doing in their holidays or what the ideal holiday might be. Perhaps get people talking about some charitable event. Or more importantly, once you've got the process going, things that I found out this week, because innovation is the lifeblood of your organization. So there's plenty of things that you can do to get the conversation going, because getting the conversation going is simply the most important thing.
Maurice, one of the ones that I often used to use as a bit of an acid test as I visited contact centers, I'd go and ask the team leaders what their advisors and their team had done at the weekend. And you could really see those that had got engaged teams, because a lot of them went, oh, sorry, I've been too busy, I don't know. And the more engaged ones could go around every one of their team and tell me what happened at the weekend. And that's just one of those little nudges that can just make a difference.
Absolutely. It's a small thing, because habits of communication are predominantly subconscious. So if we trigger more use of those habits, we create momentum in a really, really easy way. And that, Jonty, is an absolutely fantastic example. We know absolutely with a significant degree of certainty that happy, engaged staff produces more profitable customer relationships. Every metric says that. And what does a happy customer service representative want? Pretty much the same as everybody else. So how do we engage them more? We start small, and that drives the conversation. So I just want to, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on to another big thing to think about. Get visual in what you're doing. So on the top left-hand side of my screen, you can see Charlie, who is the Dublin bus bot that we created. And we managed to get people talking to Charlie for 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And 70% of users in the Dublin bus community actually completed this 11.5-minute survey because they didn't think they were having a survey. They were having a conversation with a bot. Using visual symbols made that conversation really, really easy for people to get through and to enjoy. But there's another scientific piece that sits under there that I'll just explain briefly. When you use symbols, the way in which the brain processes and makes the choice is different than when you ask specific questions. It's a more subconscious process, which is why when you look at the scale at the bottom of the screen, this scale is actually one that's used in medical situations to get children to describe their pain in the most honest way possible. And so using visuals is absolutely a vital part of the way that we deal with things cognitively. So that, can we improve our visual story is a good thing. But the acid test of communication is this gnarly thing of emotion. And my acid test of that is how angry is angry. As someone who's worked in some really large organizations, if you can't explain something to me in a simple way, then I can't explain it to the next person, and so it's no use. As a large organization, we're blind to things that we can't understand and we can't explain. And often what we say about emotion is a fallacy. We say it's difficult because it's like comparing apples with oranges. But actually, we do compare apples with oranges every single day. We make a decision that perhaps today, though the apple was very nice, I want to eat the orange, or vice versa, or that might be the best apple in the world, but I don't like apples, so what the hell? Or maybe I don't really care which, just give me one of them because I'm hungry. All of these things need to be explained easily. And so you've got to ask yourself what a good metric is. And on this slide, I'm not going to go through it, but basically there's a series of things that you should be asking yourself. What makes a good metric? And my fundamental thing is it's got to be easy to understand. Because I want the person at the front line, I want the person in the boardroom, and everybody in between to have the same common understanding. So we start with a standard binary scale. Something is true or it's not, something is active or passive. Basically, the three states that exist, i.e. positive, negative, and passive, are either true or false. And that's really useful. It's a lot more useful to me than trying to say that the customer was 20% dissatisfied and 12% disappointed, because I can't use that to drive my organization. But in the same way that Chris's role is defined as customer success, his focus is on the outcome of a customer's engagement, the customer's experience. And now what I'm suggesting is that what we need to be talking about is the actual outcome of the emotional experience. So something is true or it's false. And then the only other thing we need to worry about is the scale of it. So there we've got a nice 10-point scale that describes everything that we could possibly want. And I'm just going to show you how easy it is to use in terms of how angry or happy the customer is. Your negative scale goes from not really through to very, or very, very, or very, very, very. And if you can do those three things, then what you're able to do is to change the language. you can use if, but, so. You can create communication in a simple way, and you can join those metrics together so that what you've got is a way of weighting any kind of information. And that means you can take anything off your post-it board and you can describe it in a really simple way. And here's a really interesting thing. Most customers that have problems, in a US survey just published a little while ago, the RAGE survey of 2017, said that for a period of their time, their customers actually felt rage about the experience they've had. Now, that means that for a period of time, they were in a peak state of relationship. But a year from now, they probably won't even remember it. Having a simple scale allows you to be able to describe almost anything. And describing it to your colleagues is probably my biggest tip. So finally, I just want to talk about customer effort, and I just want to underline the importance of it before I hand it over. So I don't want to spoil what's about to be spoken about and perhaps what comes in the questions. But the reality is, if you doubt the veracity of a customer effort score as a metric, there's an awful lot of people who are now solidly behind it. And my sole contribution to your understanding of this is to say, when I look at the arrival of Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and all of these other platforms like Instagram, they have one common factor that makes them interesting from the point of effort. And that common factor is that what they are involved with is making things easy for us. We like it, and as a result, in our millions, hundreds of millions, and possibly billions, we've bought into these experiences. So in terms of customer effort, we know with a high degree of certainty that it will reduce your ROI. It does reduce your return on capital employed. Most good effort reduction programs will produce measurable results. Most effort reduction programs will improve satisfaction and lifetime value. And my advice as to how to go about it is to look at the time gaps in your customer journey. Look at the way in which things stop and stall and focus in that. Adding time to your customer journey maps is a really practical way. And then obviously talking to technology gurus like my good friends from New Voice Media to work out how to improve the performance of your customer journeys during those moments is a great way forward. So let me summarize and just come back to my key tips. The first is you need to recognize that behavior is often cheaper, is often more cost effective than the technology stuff. And the balance between the technology and the behavior, when you're doing both together and getting it right, that's when you're really getting a win. And that's where, you know, your discussion probably with customer success starts. And habits are a really important thing. And if you go away from today and you start to look up Richard Thaler, you start to look at books like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, you're going to find that there's a whole range of things that you can do that's going to improve things. I cannot stress, start with a small agenda of getting people talking to each other. That's what you need. Get out of the way of the customers, get out of the way of your staff, get them talking, and suddenly you've got yourself a more empowered, more innovative organization that's going to make things happen. Talk simply, stop taking the complexity out of the language. I want to know what the impact of what happened more than I want to know the color and the nature of it. So those are my thoughts, and I see that I have, for once, been brief by my standards. Jonty?
Maybe I could just add a piece of that. Some of the yeah, thanks. So using that minute up, but one of the things we did this year back in July was launched a community portal, and that to Jonty's point about getting customers to talk to each other has been a fantastic piece of technology that has improved that. And I review that quite regularly. I delve in there, look at what customers are saying, and for me and the other execs, it's just a great way of seeing what they're thinking about our products and our services. So and we're not doing anything. We're just letting customers talk to each other. Absolutely.
And it is that sort of those verbatim comments that are in the customer languages that
they are in their own words. It's a fully open platform. One customer will raise something, I want to create this report, I'm having a bit of trouble with this or whatever, and another customer will say, yeah, I've tried that, how about this? And then the conversations usually spawn out to a bit more and a bit more insight. So it's great.
Well, thank you very much for that, Maurice. And certainly some good takeaways there. I'd say the nudge I like, smile and say thank you. Very, very simple technique there. I love the way about for angry customers, explain it to me so I can explain it to someone else. It's a great way of diffusing, getting people talking, as you said. Keep things visual. I do like the scale of 3, and there's a big debate I know about whether you should have the green smiley face on the right or on the left-hand side of those 3. I think that's almost another webinar about on that. And lastly, make it easy. And one of the things I often see that make it easy means is make it easy for the customer. It doesn't mean make it easy for the company. It can actually be often incredibly complex to make things easy. When you registered for today's webinar, you probably got an invite. We pre-filled in your details up on the screen because we kind of know who you are. It took us about 6 months to get that technology working. So very easy for you, actually quite complex for us as an organisation. Just
on that point, I'm sure many of your subscribers use a product called Slack, a collaboration tool. And they've made that tool, it's all about making it easier for collaboration. They've made it mastered the science of it. So, and it's right, it's absolutely the right way to go.
Well, we're going to be looking at some top tips and questions, but before we do that, I just want to do another little audience poll, and that is, what do you use your customer satisfaction measurements to do? So if you'd like to track all that apply, do you use it for tracking high-level performance over time? Do you use it to identify broken processes or areas for improvement? Do you use it to send directly the feedback on customer satisfaction to the individual advisor? Do you use it for coaching of advisors? And do you use it for rewarding advisors? So tick all of those areas that you do, and be quite interested to see the results on this. I'll just share the results here. And Jonathan, looks like broken processes is the most common measurement over there, with 83%, followed by coaching for advisors, but only 24% of the audience are sending feedback directly to the individual advisor. Any surprises for you on that?
Disappointingly, no, it's not a surprise, because that is, what we've seen out there in the, in the contact center world. But it is certainly something I would be talking about, because I think that is key to providing very much an engaged frontline person to drive that customer satisfaction. Because if they're not seeing that feedback, how can they actually improve their service? So yeah, that is a bit of a surprise.
And it's quite encouraging to see that only 41% are using it to track improvement over time, because I hear a lot about satisfaction and people are more concerned with the trend, the overall, than actually fixing people's problems. In fact, I got a good friend who used to write in verbatim comments in all the surveys, I'd like to discuss this with you. And I think after about 3 years, he'd had 2 phone calls back. So quite a bit of difference there. Right, let's go and look at some top tips and questions from the audience. By the way, that was a sample size of 91 on that poll. Craig says, NCP 48 stands for Next Customer Prevention over the next 48 hours. It works well in omni-channel and prevents mismanagement of FCR. Maurice, do you think this is sort of a variant of first contact resolution?
I would guess so. Now I've seen it. I've heard of this style of metric. I think it's got a good value, but I do worry that it's got to be part of a balanced approach to root cause, because it's very easy to experience a situation where there's no point in me phoning back, but you haven't solved my problem. which I have to say is one of the customer experiences that drives me to be such a passionate advocate of improving customer experience.
Indeed. Well, let's have a look at some of the other things that people are saying. Steve says we use quarterly focus group scores to assess customer satisfaction. And Kath says we do stealth surveys too. I'm not sure what a stealth survey is, but that's in the store jumping up behind someone and surprising them. I'm not quite sure. So if you'd like to put some details in that. John said we've moved away from Net Promoter Score to measure the contact center experience. We found the one question very limiting in terms of actionable feedback. Chris, I guess the problem is that just this one question after a while people get to spot it.
Yeah, we do NPS. The engagement is the tough thing to get response, to get a good sample rating, to get you know, to get a mechanism that customers are happy to do that is a tough one for us.
Lucy says we're just about to launch a new 3-year customer improvement strategy, developing our own measure of what we want our customers to say about us. We're a not-for-profit housing association and going to ask our customers to give one word that describes the experience about our organisation. We then group these into positive, neutral and negative, and then apply the same calculation method. So I guess that ties in with getting people talking and, you know, explain it to me, but, you know, simplifying it down to one emotion, which I guess is something Morris has certainly been talking through. Leslie says we improve customer satisfaction by making each interaction faster and effortless while keeping the human side of it. Make the service personalized on focusing on what's critical to that customer. Ensure that after the interaction, the customer knows they don't need to do anything else. We will take care of everything. Morris, that ties very much in what we were proposing.
Absolutely. The human side is something that's got to imbue, not just in terms of the customer experience, but in terms of the relationship with the organization. If your staff feel it, it will come through to the customers, and what you're likely to do is invent new and better experiences on the fly if you're doing it well. Customer experience is a bit like a boat or an aeroplane. You know, anything that doesn't work properly is an aerodynamic drag on it. That's basically the way it works, and anything that is aerodynamically a drag, you know, costs more fuel, costs more energy to deliver, and it's the same in experience.
Yep.
Yeah, in my view.
And I think, yeah, absolutely right. It's all about giving time back to the customers. You know, make it effortless, give them the time back, make that interaction as easy and fast as possible. So I think, is it Leslie? I think her comments were spot on, really.
Indeed. And David has said, I'm going to start off a yearly birthday card email that will go out to our customers on the anniversary of their policy starting. I do actually also get an email from a number of my suppliers on the anniversary of my policy starting. It tends to be the renewal note that gets sent out.
Pop a voucher or a bottle of champagne in there, and I'm happy with that one.
Encouraging them to look at the situation and realise we're there to help them. This fun interaction will helpfully get them more engaged in our business, happier with what they do for them. My hope is this will really improve the customer satisfaction to our customers. Jonathan, that's quite a nice touch, that one. I wonder whether actually a birthday card on their birthday might be more appropriate.
I think there's two parts to this. I think one, if you obviously send that, you are engaged and it's a nice touch, but it's also good if you're speaking to the contact center and somebody wishes you that happy birthday, because you're getting that pleasant surprise. But actually this plays very nicely into what I'm talking about later, that you actually need to encourage your customers to understand the value of your service. I'm using electricity right now. I'm not really appreciating the value of it, so to switch, it doesn't really matter. But here, David is basically saying we want them to, you know, see that, you know, additional value that we're providing above and beyond all the customers. So I think it's a great message that he's trying to achieve through that.
Indeed. Katha said, the stealth surveys is no surveys at the end of phone calls, but doing it afterwards. Though the description was pretty funny. We've got a question that's come through by David saying, different industries use Net Promoter Scores differently. We don't influence our customers by telling them only a 9 or 10 will do, that 8 means passive, whereas in other industries very vocal, saying I really want a 10. Do you think we should do more to educate the public on this, or is it fair to ask them blindly? Maurice?
Please, sir, may I say, there's a real challenge with Net Promoter Score. One of the things that we absolutely know is the amount of measurement that we do impacts the outcome of the question, impacts the answer. And that's a scientific that's a scientific fact. And to a great extent, our problem with Net Promoter now is that it's become a ritual. It's become a ritual. It's no longer a real question. When I'm looking at customer experience and customer satisfaction, I'm looking at a range of things, from whether or not they repeat certain experiences, the level of engagement they have across different channels. If someone's accessing me via 2 or 3 different channels, it's not that they are failing to understand my strategy to drive them onto the cheapest one. They're actually involved in a platform-independent experience where they're relying on their relationship with us. There's a lot of things that are there, but I've recently been asked if I'd recommend my local hospital A&E. I'm not sure necessarily that I would recommend my local hospital A&E to anybody who wasn't within range of it. As I'm not medically qualified, why are they asking me this question? No, don't go to my A&E because it's the worst one in London. Who has that kind of knowledge? This has become a ritual, and although it's a very good way of getting the message out to staff that the customer is important, we've really got to, review its importance as a metric. It's a program strapline now. It's not the ultimate question. I'm sorry.
And I think your approach about simplifying it down to 3 buttons, happy, unhappy, or neutral, I think is a great simple way of putting it into customers' language, because that's something they can understand very well. Well, we're going to, before we jump across to Jonathan, I think it's quite a good one to actually do a poll now, where we're going to ask, which technologies do you believe could have the highest impact on customer satisfaction? So do you believe it's voice of the customer or customer satisfaction survey? Do you think it could be multi-channel or omni-channel technology? Do you think it could be a knowledge base or maybe a customer website, something like speech analytics? Or do you think that chatbots will have the highest impact on customer satisfaction? So I think this is quite interesting. Well, Jonathan, you're a technologist and you scored very well on the last one. What do you think is going to come up top on this one?
I think what's going to come up on top is probably multi-channel, because there is or omni-channel really we should say, because there is this demand for ease and chat, but actually all that's doing is taking the cost away from the contact center. So that's what I think what's going to come up. I would rather hope that it would be voice of the customer, because people are genuinely listening and want to do something about it.
Well, you're rather spooky, 2 out of 2 there. Which I think is very it is indeed multi-channel or omni-channel, followed very closely by a joint second there on voice of the customer, customer satisfaction, and on knowledge base. And if you're interested in knowledge base, we're doing a webinar on Thursday, 2 days' time, about knowledge bases. So what's interesting there is that only 11% of the audience think that chatbots will have a big impact on customer satisfaction. So, which is perhaps a bit surprising, judging by how much everyone seems to be rushing out to get one.
No, I don't think it's surprising actually. I don't think, not from a customer satisfaction perspective, I would expect chatbots to be on there. I think the interesting one there, speech analytics, 29, 28. The key thing about that technology enables you to find out what your customers are saying. It's not necessarily going to improve customer satisfaction probably from an internal perspective and users of the program. So I think like Jonathan, omni-channel would be the one that I would have expected to be there. So that's good.
Yeah, and certainly we had a comment last week's webinar saying our customer satisfaction on our chatbot is only 30%. So I think maybe we're rushing a little quickly into into the technology, though it sounds like with Morris examples of the bus service, if you pitch it in the right way and perhaps don't pretend to be a person, that actually a chatbot could do well. Right, Jonathan, we're going to pass across now, and Jonathan, you'd like to share some of your ideas on how we can improve customer satisfaction. Let's just pass the baton across to you, and you can take us through some of the ideas.
We can see my screen now. Brilliant. Okay, so
we can indeed.
Fantastic. So just a quick couple of slides on my background in New Voice Media, that basically we provide cloud contact centers across the globe. And as we've talked about, where we're located, we've got approximately 700 clients, ranging from 10 to 1,000 seat contact centers. And we're backed by private equity, which we can see here. But I think the key thing about us is that it's all our own technology, and it's a true multi-tenant contact center platform. So we've been talking obviously about different technologies throughout this session. So we can do multi-channel or omni-channel routing, as well. So we can do route voice and non-voice, such as cases and SMS and social, which ties very well to what Morris was saying as well. But ultimately, we are trying to be able to do inbound calls where we can personalize the customer experience and recognize who the customer is and route them to the correct place. Similarly, we can do outbound where we enable, preview dialing, and I should have moved on to the next slide, to click to dial to track all of the outbound calls inside Salesforce and basically enable managers to get a better view of how their sales teams are performing. So that's just a very quick overview. What I want to cover is these 6 things in the next few slides. So what I want to do within here is some of what I'll be saying clearly follows on from what Morris has been saying, but I want to basically start my half of the session by posing the question, why are you looking at the customer satisfaction? Are you doing it because the CEO has heard that everyone else is doing it, or are you doing it as a differentiator to basically make you stand out from your competitors? Or is it just in your corporate culture and everything you do is about the customer itself? So I want to talk about, again, what makes for this satisfied customer and how do you know that they are satisfied, and then how do you measure it, which ties in with obviously some of what we've been talking about. So you may know that every year Forrester has been creating this Forrester Customer Experience Index. And what they do is they speak to customers to understand their experiences. They've analysed the feedback and realised that good experience comprises of 3 things, which is basically, did you achieve your goal? So this is in effect first contact resolution. The other one is, was it easy to get your question answered, which is a bit like being measured through customer effort scores. And internally, you may see that as basically providing multi or omni-channel support, which is obviously the poll we've just done. And basically, those 2 form 50% of that customer experience index. And it's what New Voice Media have been focusing on successfully for the last 15 odd years. And what we want to do is take this to the next level in contact centers. And this is where it links in with what Morris has been talking about. And the third and most important element is basically how that experience made you feel. And this is normally measured using NPS or CSAT, which we've touched on. And basically this element of how it feels accounts for 50% of that customer experience. So you really need to understand the emotions of your customers to provide that great customer experience. And as an example, if you gave this webinar a 9 out of 10 in a survey, we'd obviously be very pleased, or 8 out of 10 as opposed to Dave's point. But why did you give that, and how can it be replicated? Basically, only the emotion can tell you that. So I guess the question is, how can we actually deliver that great customer experience? So I would argue you need the equivalent of a CCO or a chief customer officer who drives the business from the customer's perspective. And I appreciate that this can be an expensive resource for some companies, but the objectives and the principles of the role need to exist, and basically have someone empowered within your business to make the appropriate change and drive advocacy. And some of you are probably going, well, we have such a person, but the question I would ask is, does that person represent a process or a strategy? And basically it needs to be the strategy against which all big decisions that you have within the business are tested against. So basically it shouldn't be just a make money strategy, but a do it right strategy. So I just want to draw on a personal experience, was that I had a hole in my shoe after 4 months from buying it, and the company had a 6-month warranty, which they honoured, but they sent the new shoes to the wrong delivery address, and they did it twice. And finally, they sent the third pair of shoes to my home address. And basically a make money strategy focused company would have only sent the third pair out after the first 2 pairs had been retrieved. But a do it right strategy basically says, make the customer happy. So it cost the company a bit more, but basically they sent out the third pair to me, even though the first 2 hadn't been retrieved. It cost them a bit more, but ultimately I'm telling you as a wide audience, it was Charles Tyrwhitt. I'm very satisfied. It was truly a correct strategy within here. And basically, and this is a key point, where basically the brand promise actually matches the brand service. And that's something that needs to be considered within yourselves. The way to basically make the change is to realize where the pinch points are. And I know that kind of sounds obvious if you're gathering customer feedback, by asking customers where the problems are, and not just requesting that lots of irrelevant questions are asked, which again follows on what we're talking about. But you've probably got a good idea from external sources. But what about internally? I would argue you don't need to put management into the customer's shoes, as your senior management should already have this message of giving a great customer service. And basically the front line will already want to give a great service. Yeah. But actually there may be some internal KPIs that are blocking the message from getting to the front line. And the obvious one might be AHT. How can you ensure a good experience if you're watching the clock or following guidance from head office who don't fully appreciate the branch or store's experience? You really need to make sure that the message from the top and the desire from the bottom are truly aligned, with no KPI blockers, in middle management. And another one is really, you want to use innovation, which I kind of don't like that word because it's overused. All it really means is coming up with good ideas. And what I'm really suggesting in here is listen to your frontline staff, the people who actually talk to your customers, and they know pretty much 100% of the customer's issues. But how you listen is, that's up to you. And then within here, and the but, and it is a big but, you actually need to listen and act. Yeah, and act is a key word here. Otherwise, people will stop making these suggestions. Yeah? And it's really so much more than just listening and acting. It's basically about changing the agent behavior and leading to employee engagement. And we were touching on this earlier. And basically an agent that is listened to, empowered and valued is going to provide that better customer experience. Mm-hmm. And then what you really want is you want all your employees supporting the front line, as that basically is where the emotion is generated by the customer. And that's where we will determine if the customer had a good experience. But you also want to kind of go one step further and share that feedback from customers with the agents, which, we weren't really doing based on that earlier poll, because that's going to drive that engagement, because they see exactly what the customer thinks of them. And a key point here, although very simple, is that they are customers somewhere else. Your employees will have that same experience. And this is basically how you want to go about changing agent behavior. So I know, and I appreciate these are, great aspirations here, but how do you do it? And ultimately, this does depend on where you are in the customer program, and that's a whole conversation in itself. So really key things are, you want to ensure that you ask for feedback at the right moment, through tightly integrated telephony, omni-channel and CRM systems. And that's basically going to, greatly increase response rates, as the customer will have their experience in their mind. And also what's key is the emotional state only lasts for that limited period. Otherwise, as we said earlier, a year later is obviously an extreme example, it starts to die, but it needs to be actually minutes rather than hours. And the right moment needs to reflect the experience. I didn't say real time or immediately after, I just said the right moment. And I'm sure we've all seen those surveys appear, on a website asking how was your experience before you'd even had an experience. That clearly isn't the right moment. So you also need to make providing the feedback easy. You know, you shouldn't ask lots of questions that the business wants to know about, but ask about what the customer wants to tell you. And that is what is important to them. And also, don't just use email to ask for feedback. As we all know, open rates are low and not real time. You should try SMS, because SMSs are opened basically within 4 minutes, and 95% plus of SMSs are actually read at that point. So I think at this point we were going to just do a quick poll, which I'll hand you back to Jonty for a moment.
Yeah, so the poll question we've got is, when do you measure customer satisfaction? And tick all of those that apply. Do you measure it during the call? Do you do it immediately after the call? Do you do it in a week? Do you do it within a month of the call, or the contact could be an email or a chat? Or do you do it periodically or ad hoc? And if you do it at different ones, just select all of the things that apply in terms of that. It'd be quite interesting to see the results. So I think we've got most of the results in here. So here we are, sample size of 85. 68% do it immediately after the call, 34% within a week, 17% within a month, 22% periodically, and only 5% during the call. Chris, that surprised me that there's not more on the call.
It's quite hard to do, isn't it, during the call? You know, you're in the flow, you want to get the interaction done, you know, first call resolution, and then sort of, you know, how are you feeling about this? And it's quite difficult. Obviously, you know, tools like call recording, speech analytics, you can analyze that afterwards anyway and look at the experience from that point of view. But after the call, you know, quite a long way, isn't it?
And I guess there's a danger that if you ask on the call, people might say the answer to please the advisor, whereas if you do it in private, they might give different feedback. So, Jonathan, if you'd like to take us through the other points.
Okay, no problem. That was certainly very interesting. I certainly reiterate what Chris was saying. So, but regardless of when you're doing it, you know, you need to know who you've interacted with. And actually, you made this very point earlier that we know who the email addresses are and all that. And I know it's so simple, but basically the message is don't ask annoying questions. If we're looking for high response rates and increasing customer satisfaction, you need to remove those blockers. And it is frustrating. They're your customers. You should know them, really. So you need to link the feedback, you know, to operational data, and these techniques reduce survey fatigue, which basically lets you, you know, your business make those decisions on more than 3 to 5%, you know, which is unbelievably low. So if you make that asking at the right time and make it easy, then you're going to increase those response rates significantly. And basically through those operational links, you can look at the volumes of feedback in the correct context, and you should be looking at the why behind the score rather than the score. And picking out low scores is a great place to start, but basically that prevents you from identifying the positive experiences and repeating them, because that's what's going to make your promoters. Regardless of whether you are in the net promoter camp or not, you want people who are loving your company. And you need that dedicated person or team to actually analyze the feedback in near real time, as that way you can identify any escalation issues quickly and act quickly. Interesting that there were, you know, a significant percentage asking within the month. You know, there must be a whole chunk of complaints coming in that they could actually prevent very, very quickly. And if you want customers to provide feedback, then really it's a two-sided equation. You need to be prepared to honor your side and actually act on that feedback, which is another part that's going to drive that. And then basically once you found those pinch points, you need to make business changes to prevent reoccurrence, and then you need to monitor that reduction in feedback about those issues to demonstrate the improvements and justify the cost. This is, you know, so very important, because people will go, well, why do we really need to be doing this? You know, it's expensive in whatever way it is, whether it's, you know, software or time or whatever, but and people will start to take that away from you, but you need to prove the benefits that are being created through voice of the customer. And then last slide. So basically, how can we improve customer satisfaction quickly? And first, you need to make you understand what makes for a satisfied customer. And this is going to differ for all of your businesses, but at a high level, it's basically the customer appreciating the value of the service or product you offer. And I touched on this earlier. And again, another personal example, I took a taxi to my home, And I asked the driver what he felt about Uber. You know, so I had £30 fee coming up, and I was thinking, Uber might be cheaper, but they're not in my area. And I was amazed to learn that basically taxi drivers are DBS checked, their cars are MOT twice a year, and they have £5 million worth of insurance. And suddenly, that extra cost I was paying that I hadn't expected had suddenly given me a driver that was security checked, a car that was safe, plus a lot of insurance. And now I start to appreciate, you know, the price of the taxi ride and the value of the service that I bought, and was now very satisfied. So similar to the birthday card message that had been provided earlier in this session, you know, make sure your customers understand the value of your offering, whatever it might be. Otherwise, churn will seem so easy to them. And the second one might not be a quick one, but actually it should be, as it's the most important one. Are you basically going to create a great experience, or are you going to listen to finance and process in everything you do? In other words, basically prioritize experience over price and build your strategy around that. And, you know, based from, you know, industry stuff out there, there is a clear link between that increased NPS and increased growth. I know Morris is has a colourful view of NPS, but he's right. It's our number. At the end of the day, you know, it doesn't really matter what number you use. You need to improve that customer experience. So we need to look at that. And again, you can't know what makes a satisfied customer in all cases. So how can you ask specific questions in a survey to find out what those issues the customer has? You know, that all assumes that all your customers are the same, which they're not. So basically focus on the question, what can we do better, rather than rate how we did. You need to remember that it's the customer telling you their perception of the gap between their experience and what would have made them satisfied. And it shouldn't be you asking what's important to the business. You need to listen to their emotion and not the scores. And the key message here is think outside in. And penultimately, basically share the feedback wide and loud. Get that feedback out of your customer experience team and into your business. If the customer says the agent's done a good job, then reward them for it. You know, the other agents will aspire to that and change their behavior to create satisfied customers, and basically educate the non-frontline staff about the impact of their actions too, as their contributions can be just as important as frontline staff. And if you can't implement a voice of the customer technology, then again, just listen to the frontline staff. They know, about creating employee engagement, and they want to feel valued within there, and just, you know, support the frontline in all you do. And you just need to make sure that it's a program and not a project. You know, customers' expectations are always increasing, and you need to just raise your game, you know, and the sooner the business realizes that, the better. So they were, you know, some of my ideas for how we can improve customer satisfaction. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. I think some great talking points there. You've got two strategies. Do you want to do it cheapest or the best for the customer? Put experience over price. Don't ask annoying questions, and link feedback to operational data. And very importantly, it ties in very much with Morris is saying, share feedback wide and loud within the organization and elsewhere. We're going to pick up some top tips and questions from our audience. So Christine has said, we have a surveying program that only allows the customer to rate their interaction, but allows the customer to give their immediate feedback in their own words. These words then categorized and grouped by positive or negative sentiment, as well as business segment and ease of service. That looks like they've got some sort of analytics in there.
Yeah, I could be using open SMS to get the response back, but yeah, great way, really good.
Rune says, keep your advisors happy. I feel this is the key to ensuring we have happy customers. Often customers will mirror the mood of the advisor. I personally run monthly incentive schemes and come up with new ideas to motivate my agents to provide fantastic customer satisfaction and enjoy that. Morris, I see that seems to resonate quite nicely with you.
I did work on a project with some people a couple of years ago that's been very successful, where we make the feedback part of a competition for the agents. So the feedback is not just part of what the agents expect to find out from what goes on with the customer and what customers say, but actually there's an internal competition to turn it into a game to guess the right number. and it just keeps people slightly more engaged, and all of their customers, all of their staff engagement metrics showed that creating customer satisfaction as a sort of game got people's attention a bit. It's just a thing. I think that's good, what's being said.
I think you can certainly do well. We've got a question here, which is Craig asked the question, what are your thoughts on using natural language understanding to monitor the difference in the highs and lows of customer sentiment, with the delta acting as a measure for satisfaction? Jonathan, any brief thoughts on that?
Aspirationally, I can see where you're going with that, and the natural language bit is good because you'll pick out positive and negative words, but I think it's slightly flawed in that it will create an average and you will be missing the actionable insights. You actually need to be looking at the positive phrases, the negative phrases, and actioning those rather than just looking at the average.
So in the guise of, we've reached the top of the hour now, of keeping one or two words, what would you like best about today's webinar? If you'd like to put that, or what didn't you like it, put that in the box. You can watch the replay, callcenterhelper.com recorded webinars. Just going to pick the winning tip, and that is from Peter. And again, in the thing of keeping it feedback very simple, just ask one question. How did you think it went today? Quite a nice one from the customer in terms of just getting some immediate feedback. We do have a simple 4-question long survey if you'd like to fill that in. If you'd like a demonstration of the new Voice Media product, you can also tick that in the webinar feedback as well. So I'd just like to say thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Maurice Pentel from the Customer Experience Foundation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you to Jonathan Kershaw from New Voice Media.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Chris Haggis from New Voice Media as well. So we're back on Thursday, where we're going to be looking at knowledge base, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you then. Bye-bye.